should be good to go.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead and get us started. And, if people continue to trickle in, that's great. And we may have some folks watching the live stream as well. But I'm Selena Colburn, and I'm here on behalf of the House Progressive Caucus. We're going to share some of our priorities for the legislative session today. So these are the policies we'll support through bills, through amendments, through collaborations, through other kinds of channels. And you'll notice a common theme here, I think. We've been living through a pandemic for almost a year now. And while we've worked hard on our public health response and on providing support and relief where we can, there's really no question that the COVID-19 crisis has amplified the inequities in our society. Every day, we're learning more about the outsized health impacts of the virus on BIPOC Vermonters, the disparate rates of unemployment experienced by women, especially women of color, and the tremendous pressures placed on Vermonters who were struggling long before last March. And many of these people are the low-wage frontline service workers who we have all relied on to keep our economy afloat during the last years, both as workers and as consumers. So while we as a caucus believe we need to be thoughtful, we also believe now is not the time for holding back on addressing the roots of these inequities. The legislature must support bold, transformative policies to make change, rather than try to restore a status quo that left so many Vermonters behind. And we can't hesitate to do too much because of the pandemic. The pandemic asks us to step up and do more in this moment, not less. The Vermont Progressive Party platform is grounded in intersectional principles of social, racial, economic, and environmental justice. Our work is all about justice, and over the next biennium, we will hold ourselves up to these values as we seek to build back an inclusive, fair Vermont for all that allows us to be stronger and more resilient than ever. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Representatives Chena and Small to talk to us about issues of public safety and equity.
Thanks, Representative Colburn. I'm Representative Brian Chena from Burlington, Vermont, Chittenden 6-4. I a district mates with Selena Colburn. And I live in the Old North End part. She lives in the East District part. So thanks for joining us today. So I am going to start by asking a question for all those out there to consider, which is, what is public safety? What is public safety? Too often, public safety is shorthand for the policing and criminalization of human behavior. Yet these approaches have failed to keep the public safe and have neglected to address the reasons for people's behavior, which in many situations have intensified stigma, pain, suffering, disparities, and inequities of our society. What would it take to really keep the public safe? We, the Progressive Caucus, we are re-envisioning public safety as a framework of transformative intersectional policies that build equity and fairness into all of our institutions, that guarantee access to healthcare, housing, and economic opportunity, and that redirect our justice system away from crime, punishment, and further trauma towards accountability, healing, and restoration of the social fabric. The public health emergency of COVID-19 pandemic has intensified the public health emergency of racism. We must take swift action to create equity in healthcare and to reimagine public safety by building an emergency response system that sends people the right assistance in their greatest moment of need, whether it be mental health and substance abuse services, universal housing options, economic resources. All of these things should fit into a continuum of universal health care, and we need to start by implementing universal primary care. Ultimately, we don't need to police each other more. We must take care of each other better. So now I'd like to hand it over to Representative Taylor Small.
Thank you, Representative Chena.
Thank you.
And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Taylor Small, representative from Winooski and a little sliver of Burlington. And building on what Representative Chena said, the way that the systems are set up right now are not supporting everyone, and especially those who are most vulnerable and not reflected within these systems. So as a progressive party, we will support and introduce legislation that addresses Indigenous rights and sovereignty, the disparities within our criminal justice system, community oversight of the police, and the decriminalization of sex work. But this is just the beginning, and there is so much more that we will work on and will support as the year continues. And recognizing that as we are living through a global pandemic, we have seen many epidemics in our nation that have affected vulnerable communities time and time again that we have not addressed because it does not affect the vast majority. And as we reflect on the many epidemics that happen in our nation, it is important to recognize that for the fourth year in a row, we have seen a continued rise of murder of transgender people in our nation. During the last year alone, we saw this epidemic take the lives of 44 transgender people and gender nonconforming people who were fatally or shot or killed by other violent means. And the majority of those who were murdered were Black and Latinx women. And so by allowing the gay and trans panic defense to be used in our state, we are undervaluing, undermining, and threatening the existence of our beautifully diverse LGBTQIA+ community here in the state of Vermont and in our nation. And so addressing this is just one step towards justice, but one that we must make, and one that we must make now. And continuing on in this discussion, it is my honor to introduce our leaders of the Progressive Caucus, both Representative Colburn and Representative Mulvaney-Stanek, to talk about economic dignity and how we will make those moves in the coming biennium.
Thank you, Representative Small. And I'm going to start us off here. So to truly recover from the pandemic, we really must address the economic inequality that has widened over the last year. Our state economist, Tom Cavett, has noted major disparities in the economic impact of the pandemic between the wealthiest and poorest Vermonters. And in doing so, he describes an economy divided into winners and losers. The winners include the top 1% who own stocks, business owners who are able to access relief grants and technologies, e-commerce and real estate industries who actually saw higher third quarter profits in 2020 than their profit rates before the pandemic began. It's also telling, I think, that in the US, we saw a dramatic increase last year in the sales of items like luxury cars, boats, and even personal aircraft. The rich are definitely getting richer here. In this framework, the losers unfortunately include Vermonters in the bottom 50% of the population based on wealth. And these are folks who own less than 5% of private businesses, work in frontline industries, and have no or limited access to healthcare. And again, we're talking about half the population here. A true COVID-19 response will actually tackle this growing and unconscionable disparity. We need to support policies that look to contain exorbitant executive pay. And that's an issue that I'm working on with many others this session. We need to look at capping the ratios between highest and lowest paid workers. We need to target relief more directly to those living in poverty or working low-wage jobs through the pandemic at great personal risk. And we really need to start questioning the way we raise revenue in the state of Vermont. Whether we're asking the wealthiest Vermonters to pay back some of the sizable tax breaks they received under the Trump administration, looking at our model for education funding and transforming it to a more progressive model that places less strain on low and middle income Vermonters, Or looking at how we treat the sale of mansions and highly valued second homes, which we know have actually seen a boom in of purchases in Vermont's economy this last year. So you'll see progressives sponsoring and supporting legislation with these objectives. And we sincerely hope the legislature will take seriously these new and transformative approaches to investing in Vermonters. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Representative Emma Mulvaney-Stanek.
Thank you, Representative Colburn. Hello, everyone. I'm Emma Mulvaney-Stanek, and I represent Chittenden 6-2 here in Burlington's west side of the Old North End and the southern portion of the New North End. To continue on the theme of economic dignity, the House Progressive Caucus puts working people first in our economic legislative priorities. Our work ahead is to transform our economy and name what has never worked for low and moderately income Vermonters. The pandemic offers, sadly, lessons on economic inequality and inequities that we simply cannot ignore. In 2020, thousands of Vermonters qualified for regular or pandemic-related unemployment insurance benefits. They dutifully applied every week for a new claim as required under current law, despite the fact that their economic situation remained unchanged week to week. Many were met with deficient application system to manage thousands of claims, delays in benefits, and inadequate support by an understaffed Department of Labor and subcontracted call center. We now have a data breach for 1099 tax forms for some of the UI beneficiaries in the state. We must do better for working people who lost jobs through no fault of their own. This is the purpose of the UI system. It must be modernized to match the way people work today and reflect the demands on working people so they can have economic security during gaps of employment. We also now know that the current recession is being dubbed the she-cession to reflect the disproportionate impact of job loss on women and BIPOC individuals. Vermont's own UI data from the end of 2020 revealed 73% of Vermont UI claim recipients were women. This figure was among the highest wage disparities in the entire country and reflects the further negative impact of the pandemic on women's economic well-being. We saw many small businesses apply or attempt to apply for economic relief grants through federal and state programs in 2020. And most of these programs operated with a first come, first served system. It favored businesses with formal financial documentation systems already on hand and set unattainable revenue requirements for smaller and new businesses. Business owners do not start all at the same starting point. Some have, say that again. Business owners do not have all the same access to capital, technical know-how, and resources prior to the pandemic. And this is especially true for women and BIPOC-owned businesses. These pandemic programs greatly reveal the need to create more equitable economic development policy. I will be introducing two labor bills this session that begin to modernize our worker protection laws. One on modernizing the unemployment system to improve good cause quit criteria, increase funding for language access for multilingual Vermonters, increase claim benefits for workers, and allow self-employed people to opt into the system. The second bill, co-sponsored with Representative Emily Kornheiser, is a bill to create stable jobs in Vermont. It proposes to require employers to provide reliable work schedules to employees. This is a great need for retail and service industry workers, grants all workers just cause rights in cases of termination, and requires employers to reimburse remote workers for certain at-home expenses if they're working from home. We need to move forward with policies that center working people and families and those most in need of protection and help, from paying livable wages to strengthening protections for workers to transforming our current unemployment system that centers workers rather than employers. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't say Vermont is long overdue in passing real, universal paid family leave and creating a truly affordable and accessible childcare system for working Vermonters. And with that, it is my honor to pass the mic, if you will, to my two colleagues from Southern Vermont, Representative Heather Supranant and Representative Molly Burke.
Thank you, Representative. I am Representative Heather Supranant, and I represent the towns of Barnard, Pomfret, Quechee, and West Hartford in Windsor 4-1. And I would just like to state that part of the Vermont Progressive Party's platform is focusing on environmental justice. When framing climate change, it is essential that we look to agriculture as a tool to mitigate and reverse the harmful effects of industry. We know that Vermont's agricultural community is woven into the fabric of our rural economy, and it is important that we celebrate the practices our farmers are doing to protect our soil, draw down carbon from the atmosphere, and the work being done to reduce our levels of phosphorus and nitrogen in our lakes and rivers. But regenerative agriculture practices go beyond sustainability. In addition to protecting the environment and producing healthy food, regenerative agriculture evaluates the intersections within the industry. We must focus on economic and social justice for farmers and farm workers. This pandemic has shed light on the inequities that exist within our food and farming sector. Farmers are in need of adequate resources to ensure that all Vermonters have access to healthy and culturally appropriate food. Further, we must acknowledge that severe weather events are becoming more frequent. This past growing season, and I say this as a farmer, was one of the driest that our agricultural workers have ever experienced. Farmers are going to be among the first that feel the momentous shifts in climate, and there's only so much they can do to adapt in periods of drought and inclement weather. This is the perspective that we must acknowledge. With 1 in 3 Vermonters being food insecure, we must ensure that our farming practices are not extractive and further contributing to inequity. If we are to support the vibrancy of our rural communities and the health of our soils, then we need to invest in the areas that make land accessible and affordable for all Vermonters. Financial barriers cannot be what prevents inclusivity within agriculture, because we cannot afford to dismiss those who are seeking to manage the land responsibly and with resiliency in mind. That's why I'm introducing a short form bill that will help reshape the agricultural sector to be inclusive of BIPOC and low-income folks looking to become agricultural producers. Our farms and our forests must be an important part of climate solutions rooted in principles of justice and equity. And in addition to agriculture, the transportation sector must be addressed, as Vermont is the state with one of the longest commute times, and I am happy to introduce Representative Molly Burke, who is putting in the work in this area.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Representative Molly Burke from Brattleboro, and I am on the Transportation Committee. I have been on the Transportation Committee. This is my 13th year, and I have long been concerned about climate change, even way before I came into the legislature. And I have been working to try to cut carbon emissions from transportation. It's very difficult. We're dispersed settlements in Vermont. People need to drive to get to work. So I have been working on some initiatives to cut our emissions while also providing accessible and affordable transportation options for low-income people. As we know, we know that Vermont is the biggest source of carbon emissions come from transportation. We also know that transportation is a big barrier to getting people out of poverty. It's a key to getting people out of poverty. So I am working with a number of other colleagues. In fact, we have 70 sponsors on H94, which is a bill that has a number of different initiatives to try to address this situation. Additional funding for the plug-in electric vehicle incentive program that's been in effect for a couple of years, and it's been very, very popular. And this helps make new electric vehicles accessible to low and moderate income Vermonters with subsidies. And certainly moving away from traditional gas-powered transportation towards higher efficiency vehicles is a very important step in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And in this bill, we proposed an additional $4 million for this program. Now, putting this in context, to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Accord, we would need to have 90,000 electric vehicles on the road by 2025. I think we have about maybe a little over 4,000 right now. So we really need to get moving on this. It is accelerating. There's also a specific program that we created in 2019, T-bill, which is called with Capstone Community Action, the Mileage Smart program. And this program provides incentives for low-income Vermonters to purchase a used high-efficiency vehicle. there's also a lot of help that goes along the way in helping people choose a vehicle, give a subsidy, get a loan for the extra money. And this is a really important program that Capstone runs. And then another new program that's we're considering is a program called Replace Your Ride. And this program would provide an additional cash incentive for low-income Vermonters to take their older low-efficiency vehicle off the road and replace it with a high-efficiency vehicle, or vouchers for public transportation, car share membership, new electric bicycle, whatever. So this is a really exciting program that's very new, and we're hoping to fund it. We're also looking at the landscape of electric buses. It's challenging right now, but the agency has proposed a study as to how to get us there. And I think we are definitely going to support that. So there are a lot of things happening, and I think that we're sort of aligned a lot with the administration on the need for electric vehicles. I think where the conversations are going to come down is how much money gets allocated, where it gets put. But this is a year that I feel pretty hopeful that we can make some significant initiatives, some significant incentives to actually make some changes. So now I will turn this over to my colleague, Representative Tanya Vyhovsky of Essex.
Thank you so much. I'm Representative Tanya Vyhovsky, and I am in Essex, Chittenden 881. It is now more important than ever that we ensure that all of our voices are heard and that our processes are transparent, accessible, and fair. We've seen so many instances of our very democracy being threatened and attacked. Increased attempts at voter suppression, silencing of lesser heard voices, and attacks on the very institutions we associate with our democracy. We know that the status quo is far from perfect. However, we must not only fight to protect this flawed system, but to improve it. Our vision of an expansion of democracy includes long-held progressive issues such as meaningful campaign finance reform, ranked choice voting, all resident voting, and newly arising issues like mail-in ballot curing. In order for our democracy to work, all people need to be able to participate. In the current climate, we have to look for ways to strengthen our democracy, increase civic engagement, and understand that that work must include everyone's voice. In order to do this, we have to level the playing field and get big money out of politics. We cannot have any of these things we've spoken about that we know we desperately need if our elected seats are bought and paid for by the highest bidder. Further, we need to ensure that every vote is counted and people have real choices. In 2020's primary election, we saw over 6,000 Vermont votes that were not counted due to minor technical errors on their mail-in ballots. To begin building a more inclusive system, we need to allow for these technical errors to be cured and allow for our town clerks to have 30 days before the election to count ballots and alert voters to any needed corrections so that all of those votes are counted. We also need to implement ranked choice voting so that no more are we left choosing between the lesser of two evils, but can instead allow for people to rank their choices, which would make both the voting and campaigning process more inclusive. We must ensure that all of our voices can be heard and represented if we are ever going to build towards a Vermont future that includes justice for all. Thank you. With that, back to Representative Colburn.
And actually, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Representative Mulvaney Stanek, our Assistant Caucus Leader, to wrap us up here.
I mean to whip it up as the assistant. I have a little humor. We're being very serious, but I appreciate everyone tuning in today and watching at home or watching the recording later on. To wrap up, I wanted to simply say the House Progressive Caucus outlined a bold, transformative set of priorities to move policy that transforms our state to a more equitable and just Vermont. Our work is grounded in equity, in social, racial, economic, and racial justice, and we are unapologetic about that. We are here to collaborate with our colleagues in the House to present bigger, bolder ideas of transformation and invite thinking beyond short-term fixes on an economy and a community that simply has not been working for many Vermonters well before this pandemic. The time is now to rethink our policies and how we make policy. Who is at the table? Who is missing? Who has been the most impacted by this pandemic? The winners and the losers tell a tale of two Vermonts. Through our policy work, we look to rebuild our state as we design our economic and community recovery plans during this biennium. And progressives are committed to rebuilding a more inclusive and resilient Vermont. Thank you. And we will welcome questions. I think that's how we do this in a virtual press conference kind of space. So we'll welcome questions both online. I know Lisa is monitoring that for us. And if we have any press in the Zoom room with us, we can open it up for questions.
Do you have a question, Kit? Go for it.
Sure, thank you. So I have a few questions, but I think the first one in terms of looking at this specifically this legislative year, when the majority party has been pretty clear, focusing on COVID relief and any other, and we'll get to whatever else we can get to. What is the feeling from you folks in terms of the appetite to look for the majority party to take up some of these proposals, which you folks just outlined?
I can try to answer that and others could jump in. I think at times it will be an uphill battle, and just as it has always been, frankly, on some of these issues that are bigger and require bigger shifts. And I also think there's a lot of possibility for collaboration with members of the majority party who do align with us and care deeply about these issues. And so, many of the things we talked about, we're working in collaboration with folks in the Democratic caucus and beyond to move forward. And I do think there's a recognition that equity is a critical lens for us to apply this year, but I think we are going to be pushing to really walk on that with some bigger, bolder actions. I don't know if others want to answer that question.
I'm certainly happy to weigh in, Representative Colburn. I have found, as Representative Colburn pointed out, that we do have allies, and we are really looking at how do we respond to this current moment and build back in a way that is more equitable and stronger. And so I think it is looking at both of those pieces and being able to do both of those things at once. Really what we're talking about is we know we have to invest in rebuilding from the havoc the pandemic has caused. And what we are saying is that rebuilding has to be grounded in justice and equity. And I think that while the majority party is very focused on COVID recovery, so are we. We're simply looking at how do we frame that COVID recovery and how do we ground that COVID recovery. So I don't think that in that sense we are not aligned with what the majority leaders are saying. It is more about how and less about what.
There was a question in the chat that would this be an appropriate time for me to answer it?
Yeah, and then I know you have one more question, so let's let Molly do that, and then we'll hear whatever else from you.
Oh, I see. Okay, I can wait.
No, I think go for it, and then we can.
Well, somebody just said, is there any concern that the focus on electric vehicles underestimates the problem we are facing rather dramatically? And I think it's certainly not the answer to our sort of existential climate crisis, but it's a start, it's a beginning. We need to just be thinking about changing the way we do things in many ways. And there's lots of there's carbon sequestration, there's forest fragmentation, there's ways, there are many different fronts that we need to work on the climate issue. And so I just think that we need to think about small steps and big steps. And this is a small step, but if it turned out that we could get to 90,000 electric vehicles in Vermont quite soon, then that would be certainly have a major impact on our emissions and also on our air quality, which is another concern.
I just note too that the Transportation Modernization Act that Molly has worked so hard on and is championed today includes provisions like in significant investments in walk, pedestrian and bike infrastructure. And then that many of us in the Progressive Caucus support all kinds of other ideas that will be trying to advance things like fossil fuel infrastructure bans and divesting state dollars from the fossil fuel industry and on and on. So we're trying to give some examples today, but this is not, we're not saying that, these bills that we've highlighted any of them is our comprehensive plan for addressing these issues. Kit, do you have other questions?
Yeah, I just had another one in terms of looking at something you said during your time speaking about looking at new ways to raise revenue, which of course is not a new discussion in the State House. But I was curious in terms of if there's a concrete proposal that you're looking at that is being floated in terms of taxing the wealthiest Vermonters at a higher rate, at a higher percentage rate, or anything. Are there any concrete parts of that proposal yet?
Yep. So actually, this is a great example of collaboration. I believe Representative White is working on a bill that some of us are interested in co-sponsoring on that particular issue. I'm introducing legislation that based on some legislation in a municipality in Oregon that actually creates a surcharge for company profits where the highest paid worker exceeds the pay rate of the lowest paid worker by a certain amount. So I think that you'll see a number of proposals for how to get at that. We're looking at also some provisions around homes and second homes. So there are a number of things that get at that. We could go into more detail, but I also noticed that Representative Chena had his hand up and maybe wanted to add something about that last question.
Thank you for noticing. I did raise my hand, and I did want to speak to Kit's first question. That you were talking about what is it like, as being part of the Progressive Caucus, how we work with the majority party, which is the Democratic Party right now, who is our allies. I see the Democratic Party as my ally on like 95% of the time. I remember when I started in the legislature, someone had said the majority party's job is to set the course of the ship, and the minority party's job is to warn about the icebergs that are in the way. I actually think our job as the super minority is to cry out that we've already hit a lot of icebergs. And so we can be saying, oh, there's some icebergs up ahead, watch out, steer the ship. But you know what? Water is filling the ship right now while the fiddles are playing and while people are dancing. There's people drowning on the ship. So I just think we need to remind people of that, because everyone wants to. I do believe that regardless of our background and our philosophies, that as human beings serving in this role, that everyone does ultimately care about people. We might have different ideas of what that looks like or how to do that, but we all care about people. And so it's our job just to sometimes be a voice for those who are drowning and be a voice for those who are working below deck and not dancing in the ballroom. So that's really how I see us working together with that metaphor is, that let's all keep coming together to make sure that that we're taking care of everyone. So I see there's another question.
Well, and Emma, I think Emma has a hand up, and then I want to make sure we get to Kit's final question, and then we can look at any other questions that have come in.
Thanks, Representative Colburn. I wanted to just add that, part of why I've aligned myself with the Progressive Party over the years is to build along the kind of the themes other colleagues have said here, is we can state in a more expansive vision that perhaps sometimes Democrats who are in leadership and have the burden of leadership, or however you want to phrase it, are sometimes feel limited by, right, to set the agenda, to run the House in this case, et cetera. And part of what what both excites me about being a progressive and being in this role as a minority voice politically in the space is to remind us of points of history where we have been bold, where the entire country, frankly, on a federal level has done bold policy changes, New Deal legislation, civil rights. There's multiple moments in history. We are living through that moment right now, again, an unprecedented moment in any of our lifetimes. And I think part of this is to, in all of our committee spaces, be a constant voice of saying we can do better. We have an opportunity to reveal, bigger pieces of the conversation in these conversations. It's also a 2-year system here. This is a biennium. So while there might be pieces that get focused on in the first year of the session, we are here for a 2-year process of really trying to bring back the conversation time and time again to those most impacted by the pandemic, which we've seen are low and moderately income Vermonters, BIPOC individuals, women. And so we're here for that struggle in terms of deliberation and making sure that new ideas have the time of day.
So yeah, I have a perfect follow-up to that in terms of looking at the pandemic, and many of you kind of touched on this, but in terms of, is there a feeling that there is momentum in the State House around shoring up some of these programs, putting forward new policies to help out folks who have been left behind? Is this an opportunity here? Do you folks see this as an opportunity in time to push forward on some of these policies that you've put forward?
Anyone burning to take that one?
I was prepared to, but if you
Tanya, go for
Yeah,
it.
go Tanya.
right. Yes, I do see momentum, and I do see it as a huge opportunity. We are without a doubt in a very real crisis, and with that comes danger, but it also does come with the opportunity to really truly make transformative change. Why would we put the energy and investment into rebuilding what we had that we know wasn't working for far too many people, when we can instead put that investment into rebuilding something that works and something that allows us to be stronger and more resilient for the crises to come? We know there will be more. And I do feel that momentum. I feel that momentum in my committee. I feel that momentum in the larger State House. And so I think that a lot of people in this space are really looking at this as the opportunity to shore up some of those systems and really rebuild better than what we had before. We can't go back. We know that where we were wasn't working. And so I think that we have absolutely a moment right now to think smartly about how we invest CARES money and think smartly about how we rebuild systems that many of us have known for a long time are broken, but now suddenly have been exposed to the general public as very broken. And so I think that also helps, that the public is aware and invested in pushing us to go further. I think it has to be an inside outside movement where we are working inside with the push from outside. And I think that's one of the opportunities the pandemic has really given us, is it's impacted so many vast swaths of people that they are now saying, wait, this isn't working. And that really allows us to be more bold and more transformative.
I wanted to offer a tangible example, because I'm not sure if everyone, watches House Commerce and Economic Development every day, but that's my committee. And I just wanted to name a change I've already seen from what I heard happen in the 2020 session and what I've seen among my committee colleagues around a shift and change momentum and kind of rethinking business as usual policymaking. So, in the economic recovery grants that were rolled out and the CARES Act allocations, people were moving very fast in a very kind of quick way to get money out the door to businesses in need in this context in terms of commerce and economic development. And while there were BIPOC and women-owned business earmarks towards the end of that process at the end of 2020, it was sort of at the end of the process. And there was, again, much of a rush kind of mentality around policymaking. And in the beginning of this session, the governor came with a $10 million proposal to ask the state from general funds, or the legislature from general funds, to put $10 million more into businesses. And instead of acting quickly and moving the money quickly and getting out the door, there was a really informed pause around not putting into the Budget Adjustment Act immediately, because we needed more discussion. And that discussion started to reveal, how did this money land or not land for small businesses, especially those owned by BIPOC folks, for business owners who are underserved and under-resourced in our economy right now. And that slowed down process allowed deeper and richer conversations that Republicans, moderate Democrats, super lefties like me are having in committee, that are starting to understand BIPOC business owners aren't members of the chamber. These are very often white and exclusive spaces for BIPOC owners. And that's where a lot of the technical support was coming out of for people trying to navigate these economic relief programs last year. So I use that as a tangible example that I'm already seeing places where I would expect kind of fast tracking economic development, not pause and reflect on what did not work, even just last year, to try to get it right, to go back to that how I think Representative Vyhovsky was just speaking to before my AirPods died. I think you were saying this, to really think about the how, like we can do this better. And even if it's small tweaks, that's a recentering that I haven't seen before in economic development discussions, at least.
I will also add on to that this momentum is coming from having the voices in the room that are pushing these conversations forward. It's the progressive voices that are asking the questions that haven't been asked historically, that are engaging in the conversations with our fellow committee members and saying that this needs to change. This wasn't working before. And how can we think more creatively moving forward? And I just think it is a testament to this caucus and the work that is done in the State House and outside around we are looking for transformative change through this pandemic and after this pandemic. And this is really just a starting point.
I think we have one more. I know we want to let you go, Kit, and we probably have to get to committee ourselves. But I think we had one more question that just came in through the Facebook live stream, and I'll just read it. So there was a comment saying it's really important to hear all the candidates, including the independents, and let them participate in all debates. This is a real problem in Vermont. And the question is, where do we stand on allowing all candidates to participate in all debates? And if we agree, what can be done to ensure that this will happen? Anybody want to respond to that?
I don't know how much influence we have over who chooses who they allow in debates or not. I will say, like that I'm often in spaces, as many progressives are, where we want to speak and we're not allowed to speak because we're not considered insiders in that space. So I can relate with people feeling excluded from discussion. And I know that historically BIPOC folks and LGBTQ folks and people with disabilities have been excluded from a lot of spaces, and women have been excluded from a lot of spaces. So in general, I believe that we should be more inclusive rather than less, that we should open discussions up. I don't know, like what can be done to ensure, I'm looking at your question, trying to respond in real time, like what can be done to ensure that it will happen? I guess, as members of the Progressive Caucus, we could advocate that internally, that the Progressive Party lean towards inclusive practices when holding debates. And as allies in the Democratic Caucus, we could ask that the Democratic Party do that as well. As for the media, I'm not sure how we make the media include people, because I feel like sometimes it's hard to even get my own voice out there. So, but yes, I would say that, and I see others nodding, that we would probably lean towards inclusion of as many voices as possible. In fact, maybe this is a good chance to throw out the idea that if we had people's assemblies around the state in every region, that there would be regular meetings in each region where anyone can come and participate. And that we need more institutions of civic engagement. We need more institutions of direct democracy. And we need to shift power so that people have more of a say in the decisions that affect their lives.
I think that's a great note to end on, unless anybody has anything to add. That was beautifully said, Brian.
Only piece that I want to add to that is that for me, inclusion is not just about making sure we include everyone known, but it's about stopping and asking ourselves who isn't at this table and actually taking action to bring them to the table.
Oh, we have one last question that we'll throw out there, and then I think we do need to wrap up. Any thoughts about Senate Gov Ops looking at changing the rules about progressives running in Democratic primaries? Yeah, I know that was that question of like, if you run in a primary, do you have to make that primary your primary party affiliation, has come up in the Senate, and we're, of course, we'll be talking to our House colleagues about that. I'll say for my part, as someone who does run in a Democratic Party primary and has kind of embraced the fusion model, I think it's been a really important way, both for me and my constituents, of recognizing the strong alignment that exists, as Representative Chena said, in so much of the time between Democrats and progressives. And you know, when progressives didn't do that, we heard a lot of feedback about being spoilers in races. And I think folks are really hoping to avoid that. And so that would be a strong question I would have about that legislation from my Democratic colleagues, if that's really a scenario that they're looking to return to.
I will also add, Representative Colburn, and building on what Representative Yuhovsky brought up, which is that if we are not looking for progressives to run as fusion candidates, then we should add on to that a ranked choice voting amendment, and really growing and building on the fact that here in Vermont, we have a strong third party, and that is a gift that we have to our communities. So hearing that discussion is happening, and would offer that ranked choice voting amendment as a way to continue to build on the strength that we have.
And Representative Colburn, can I just build one more piece of that puzzle? Is the fact that I'm very proud of the fact that Vermont has always had open primaries. I think it's one of the more democratic ways that I've seen state governments operate, in terms of the primaries about the people of Vermont deciding who they want for office. And if you talk to most Vermonters, they're proud of the fact that they go all over the ballot with the types of political persuasion or partisanship that they support based on whatever the level of the ballot they're voting on. And you know what we can, I'm committed to doing more to add to democracy and allowing access for folks to run, and not necessarily creating harsher rules for voters to be able to know who aligns better by their issues and their values. And until there's more ability on the federal level to break up kind of a binary way of thinking that it's just blue and red in terms of Republicans and Democrats, I think Vermont has something really special around open primaries and the ability to engage with folks and see who resonates, and have various ways to describe yourself on the ballot so that you can speak to the voters.
Okay, great. I think that is it for questions. And I think we've been at this a long time. Really appreciate the interest and patience of folks who've stuck around. And yeah, feel free to be in touch with any of us with further follow-up questions, whether you're media or interested member of the public. And we really look forward to moving this bold platform in collaboration with both our colleagues and with our communities.